You're standing in a line. Maybe it's a pharmacy, maybe the DMV, maybe a doctor's office where the magazine on the table is from 2014 and someone has already done all the word searches. Your phone is dead, or you left it in the car on purpose, because you're trying to be a person who can just be for 5 minutes. So you stand there, and within about 45 seconds, your brain does something you never asked it to do. It opens a tab, not on a screen but in your head. Suddenly, you're replaying an argument from 3 weeks ago, except this time you say the perfect line. Then you're planning a conversation that hasn't happened yet, wondering if you left the stove on even though you don't have a stove, and mentally drafting an email to your boss about a problem you will never actually raise. You shift your weight, you sigh, and you think, God, I'm bored, and underneath that my brain is broken. Normal people don't do this. But here's the question this video is actually about. What if your brain isn't idle when you're bored? What if it's working harder than almost anything else you do all day, and you've just been taught to call that work nothing? Right now, boredom means failure. It means you couldn't find a podcast, a feed, a game, a show, a scroll hole deep enough to fill the gap. It means you failed to entertain yourself, failed to be productive, failed to be calm. We treat a quiet moment the way we'd treat a broken appliance, something to fix and fast. Apps promise to help you meditate by clearing your mind, as if the mind were a countertop you could wipe down. Schools punish daydreaming, and offices fill silence with meetings about other meetings. Every elevator, every checkout line, every pause in a conversation is a slot where something is supposed to happen. And when nothing happens, when you're just standing there, the story you tell yourself is simple. My brain turned off. But that story is likely wrong. In 2001, neurologist Marcus Raichle at Washington University in St. Louis published work that should have changed how we talk about boredom forever. He wasn't studying boredom directly. He was studying what the brain does when you're not doing a task, sitting in a scanner, waiting between instructions, staring at a blank screen. And he noticed something strange. The brain regions that lit up during rest weren't random noise. They formed a network, a coordinated pattern of activity that dropped the moment you focused on a demanding task, then surged back the instant the task ended. Raichle called it the default mode network. Here's the number that matters. Even at rest, your brain burns roughly 20% of your body's total energy. The off brain isn't off. It's running a baseline load that would bankrupt a small country if your laptop did the same thing while sleeping. Before Rachel's work, neuroscientists mostly threw away resting state data as useless gaps between the real experiments. After it, they had to admit the brain's default isn't silence, it's a mode. But here's what's strange. The default mode network isn't just active, it's organized. It connects regions involved in memory, self-reflection, imagining the future, and thinking about other people's minds. When researchers looked closer, they found the resting brain wasn't flipping through static. It was running structured inner content, like a theater that stays open between shows and rehearses the next act whether you bought a ticket or not. In 2007, neuroscientist Randy Buckner at Harvard, writing with colleagues, described one of the network's core jobs as mental time travel. Past events, future scenarios, alternate versions of conversations that already happened, simulations of conversations that haven't. Your bored brain isn't empty. It's a time machine with a social agenda. So what is it actually doing in that pharmacy line? Researchers have mapped several recurring jobs the default mode network runs when the outside world stops demanding your attention. First, autobiographical maintenance. Your brain replays recent events, files them into the story of who you are, and tests which memories still fit. It's less like a filing cabinet and more like an editor who keeps rearranging the same footage until the plot makes sense. Second, future planning, and not the productive kind you put in a calendar, but the anxious kind. What might go wrong tomorrow, what you should have said, what you might say. Your brain runs cheap simulations before it pays full price in real life. Third, social rehearsal, the one that makes boredom feel embarrassing. You don't just daydream. You stage arguments, practice vulnerability, and design comebacks for people who aren't in the room. Neuroimaging studies have linked the default mode network to theory of mind, which is the ability to model what other people think and feel. You're not wasting time. You're running a social flight simulator with no instructor and no off switch. And if you've ever rehearsed a confrontation you'd never have, won every version and still felt worse, congratulations, your brain was doing its job. You just weren't in the cockpit on purpose. In 2010, psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert at Harvard published a study that tracked thousands of moments in ordinary people's lives through a phone app. Their finding made headlines. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. People reported lower mood when their thoughts drifted away from their current activity. But buried inside that result is something most summaries skip. Killingsworth and Gilbert also found that minds wander a lot, roughly 47% of waking life. Nearly half the time people weren't fully on task, even when they thought they were doing something. Half your mental life is backstage. So if mind wandering feels like a bug, why would evolution keep it? Because the backstage crew is doing maintenance, consolidating memory, running predictions, testing social scripts, preparing you for futures that may never arrive, which sounds wasteful until one of them does. Psychologist John Eastwood at York University offered a sharper definition of boredom itself in work published across the 2000s and 2010s. Boredom isn't an empty brain. It's an unfulfilled desire for satisfying engagement. Your mind wants to latch onto something meaningful and can't find a hook in the current moment. Boredom isn't the absence of thought, it's thought with nowhere to land. So when did we decide that was shameful? Somewhere between the industrial clock and the smartphone, stillness became suspicious. Factories needed attention that didn't wander, and schools needed eyes forward. Then came the perfect boredom killer, a pocket device that offers infinite hooks: news, video, messages, games, other people's curated lives. All tuned to trigger the other networks in your brain, the ones built for novelty and reward. You didn't lose boredom, you outsourced it. And when the device dies and you're back in the pharmacy line, the default mode network comes roaring back, louder and weirder and more dramatic, because you haven't practiced sitting with it in years. The revenge screenplay against the barista isn't a malfunction. It's a network that got starved of quiet and doesn't know what pace to run it anymore. We didn't fix boredom. We anesthetized it and then called the withdrawal symptoms a personality flaw. So the next time you're stuck waiting and your brain starts producing a 12-part miniseries about your life, notice what you do next. You don't usually say, my default mode network is consolidating autobiographical memory and running social predictions. You say, I'm bored, I need to stop thinking. But the evidence points somewhere else. You're not failing to think. You're failing to aim your thinking because modern life trained you to aim it only at screens, tasks, and other people's outputs. Your brain was never built for emptiness. It was built for inner cinema, past, future, self, other people, running in the gaps between survival tasks. Boredom isn't proof that you're lazy or broken or bad at mindfulness. It's proof that the backstage crew showed up for work and the main stage is empty. The question isn't how to turn your brain off. It's what you'd hear if you stopped treating the noise as a mistake and started treating it as a signal. What keeps coming back in the quiet is the argument, the future, the person you haven't called. That's not random. That's the default mode network handing you a note from a part of your life you haven't finished with yet. You don't have an empty head. You have a loud one and a culture that told you loud means wrong. If you're still likely wrong about the obvious things, like sleep and time and the noise inside your own skull, subscribe to Likely Wrong, and we'll keep asking the questions you didn't know you had.